I'm Javier Espinosa, Europe Executive Editor of the Capital Forum, a challenger of the news mainstream coverage of EU policy in Europe. With me, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce today Andreas Schwab, MEP. You've been at the Parliament already for over 2 decades. It's your 5th mandate. How did you come to be in the limelight at the beginning of your career for people who don't know who you are?
First of all, my constituency is in the middle of Europe, between France and Germany and Switzerland. So if you are having to deal with Europe there, you're all the time in the spotlight. But I think you want to refer to that resolution that the Internal Market Committee did in 2014, complaining about the Commission not doing enough to keep digital markets in the area of search engines open.
In particular, Google, we're referring to here.
We were not referring to a specific company, but you have made the right interpretation. This was the problem at the time.
So you've been following digital markets and how to make them fair and contestable now for quite a while. And a lot has happened since, and we're going to get into the discussion about digital markets and what's going on given the changes of the administration. But I thought that we should start this conversation today because we cannot ignore the storm that we have outside, a metaphorical one at least, in the U.S. and the recent tariffs and the tariffs that come after that. And probably by the time this podcast is aired, who knows what the world would look like. But how, from Brussels, are you seeing the events, and what should the role of the EU be in all of this?
Well, first of all, the role of the European Commission and the European Union in general should be that we are sure about ourselves, about our own strengths, which is largely thanks to the single market that we have. 450 million people, a very big number of turnover, and a very high PIB that we can really be proud of, and that we can also develop further, because the Commissioner for the Internal Market, Séjourné, yesterday in the Internal Market Committee was rightly mentioning that we still have also non-tariff barriers in the European Union in between the member states. If we take them off, we can really go for further growth within the European Union. And as you mentioned, we don't know in any event what will happen tomorrow or the day after tomorrow in Beijing or in Washington or in Mar-a-Lago. We don't know that. So better not thinking too much about that, but trying to think about ourselves, what we can do. And we can still do a lot to make Europe better and stronger.
And you mentioned the single market, which is something that you have also been working on and pushing for, a stronger sort of single market. Why is that key in this event and any other challenges that Europe is facing?
Well, because it's the strengths that we have on our own, because it's the area where we could decide ourselves. But it's more difficult than it seems, because the Draghi report, the Letta report have been so crystal clear that we have to do better, that we have to spend better, that we have to make our workforce more focused on the jobs that we need, because we are missing workforce, like all the Western economies in the next 20 years. We are missing the money, and so we have to focus better. And there can be no doubt that this is quite complicated with 27 member states that all watch, and I would say that all watch still on their own belly and not on the larger picture. And in that context, the European Parliament has unfortunately not the biggest role, because we can only take the laws that the European Commission proposes. We expect the European Commission to go even for bolder steps, pushing member states to more common policies, even in areas where it might be difficult at the beginning.
Obviously, fixing the single market, it's something that lawmakers and some of the most powerful individuals in the continent have been talking about for a long, long time. So this is not going to be a quick fix, and it's not going to be something that will help the EU deal with Donald Trump or with tariffs. Some critics have said that the EU has been perhaps too slow to react. Someone compared to me Brussels with a big elephant that moves very slowly, takes determined action, but it doesn't happen overnight. Is the EU being too slow and too weak?
We have to be very careful. The EU is all of us, and we are very slow because we are too well off. Europe is living a great century at the moment. Everyone enjoys wealth and well-being, and no one cares about working and having a tough job. So when we need to act quickly, like in COVID, with the vaccines and with COVID policies, I think Europe was quite eager to adapt quickly. The problem seems to me now that we complain a lot about the Trump agenda, which is for sure very dangerous for the US, but also for the whole world. It's not logic at all, but we are very slow and we have a lot of troubles to adapt ourselves to the situation. And I think, without blaming the others, it's especially a problem Berlin, Paris, Rome, and Madrid, and I could mention all the other capitals that have all their own concerns. And there is one thing that we can learn from the US, and that's the principle: all politics is local. It's true that most people are rather inward-looking because that's the issues that they concern most with. And therefore, we have to explain better and stronger why the single market is the only solution for the economic guidelines and problems that we have.
It's very interesting that you mentioned local, and Trump, when talking about tariffs, refers also to boosting the industry. So there's like a very inward-looking sort of narrative as to why he's doing what he's doing. And you said that maybe we've been asleep or that we need to wake up. Is this the moment when we realize that globalization is dead?
As you mentioned, the single market has been sworn in all over the years. It has become quite a boring topic. And the areas where we could move on are complicated. I say spectrum policy for a single market for telecoms, a fully harmonized single market to make the companies more competitive at global level. I would say customs union. Our internal market is open by all the sides. All doors are open. You can bring in all the material that you want, unsafe, dangerous. No one cares. There is no control. There is nothing. We need to do a lot. And the question will be, when is the moment where the public understands that we have to act? Is it now? I doubt. But we have to speak about that now, because the moment that it can be needed can be tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. And we have to prepare the public for this. And it will hurt a bit if we open up the market for services. For sure, there will be le plombier polonais. But there will also be the French engineer. There will be also the German train and whatever. There will be plenty of changes, but they will not destroy Europe. They will make us richer and probably better if we are able to live with it.
I guess this changes, as we are seeing now with how things are evolving, do bring short-term pain. And you're a politician yourself, and I think you know well that people don't react to short-term pain well when it comes to election time. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's unpalatable for the EU to do all the things that you're suggesting.
Well, the EU has had just the elections, so we should now be ready to go for it. And even in Germany, there were the elections now, so we could go now. But yes, okay, the next French elections will be in 2 years, but shall we now wait for 2 years? I mean, I'm following very closely Switzerland, and Switzerland has always had the tradition to say we have to do that after the next elections. And the problem was, it was never clear what next election they were really speaking about. Was it the next one or the following one? Or, always postponing difficult questions to the future will not fix the problems. Now, I accept that it's very complicated. I accept that member states don't want to step back in areas of concern. But at the moment, we see that our market is facing troubles, not only because of the new administration in Washington, but also for other issues. And if we don't fix them, people will at a certain moment complain about us. And I would like to avoid that.
Mm-hmm. But are we then, just to stress this point, entering a new era of protectionism? Are we all pulling our supply chains and removing our exposure to other states? I mean, it looks like being intertwined and being heavily globalized is not paying off.
Well, in most of the markets, there is not only one company that can provide for a service or for a good. You have in nearly all markets still a choice. Yes, the choice, for example, for the 5G communication elements, where Huawei and Ericsson Nokia, the Nordic Ericsson Nokia stuff, seemed to be a bit more difficult to install, a bit more heavy, but it's a fair alternative. It's not true that there is only one offer. So we have to choose at a certain moment what we want to have. And companies that are under global shareholder value considerations, it's not only the digital giants, it's also all the companies in Europe that in the end follow that logics. They want to buy the cheapest to have the best shareholder value logics. So we have to educate and to push shareholders to understand that resilience is something that they should care more themselves about, because it's their money that is touched by situations where resilience is failing.
Do you think the EU needs to look for new allies and reduce its dependence to the US?
I would say, first of all, we have to be concentrating about our own strengths, because you are only a good ally if you are strong. If you show an internal division, it's difficult. I think Europe has done well in the last years, but we can do better. And that should be our first task to look at. Secondly, looking for new partners. We were in India with the Internal Market Committee. The Indians are open to Europe, but they still focus on the US, because the US market is still by far more easy for them to be reachable. We were in Singapore last year. We are in the US recently. The strength of Europe is the key trigger that we should fix first, because our single market is still allowing us for huge growth rates without being dependent of any other nation.
You've traveled to Washington many times, but more recently you were there post-elections in the US and also here. How do you see this transatlantic relationship going?
Well, I mean, we have to see that the American people is very big. They are quite similar to us, only that their democracy is based on the constitution, which gives the risk that with a few constituencies lost or won, a government can come into place or can fail. And it was a bit like that the elections have brought this new president into office. But we should now make a clear separation between the new administration and the president and the American people. And we have still a lot in common. We have to make sure that we keep in touch with all of them, but we have to defend ourselves against this new administration, which has been starting by scaring all the officials. And therefore, our contacts there were quite strange, because they were rude, unfriendly, and didn't care about the facts. That's not our approach. I mean, we understand the weaknesses and the strengths of Europe and the US, and we think that we can combine it in a way to be both better off. But that was not on the cards in these meetings. And that's a bit frustrating, because I think in the end, the Western world has a lot of issues in common that we can only defend in common, because we are all democracies, which is in the long run the best tool to accommodate the will of the people, but sometimes in the short term is a bit painful. And therefore we have to try to do it together. And I'm sure that in the long term, in the midterm, in the American people, there will also be again the conviction that this is the best to be done with the Europeans. But at that time, it looks a bit awkward what the new president and the administration are doing.
You're not the first one to mention to me that the on-the-ground interaction between EU and Americans is not really flowing, to say the least.
Well, at political level. At business level, you will be surprised that I'm meeting plenty of American companies that are thinking about coming over to the European Union. And immediately, already in the first meeting, they are asking, shall we also put our data into the European data space so that Europe is accepting our services? So this can also be a chance for a lot of businesses to come back to Europe or to install themselves in Europe. We have to be open for that. It's true that our regulatory frame is a bit tighter, but we believe, and we have to improve it a lot, there is no doubt, and Ursula von der Leyen and the Commission have made a lot of proposals, good proposals to make it lighter. But also after that, our framework will be a bit tighter, because we have another tradition and we have the belief that we have to fix the frame for predictability for businesses at a longer term distance. And that can also be a strength.
Interesting, and maybe a good side effect on the things that are going on. Now we get into the point of talking about data, businesses, digital markets, as we said at the beginning of this conversation. You were deeply involved in the drafting and in the sort of assembling of the Digital Markets Act, which is this piece of crucial landmark piece of legislation in the EU. That's very simple. Its aim is to open markets so that it's not just a handful of incumbents, typically Americans, but not only, cornering most of the market. Tell us a little bit about your experience. How was it? You and I were in constant conversation over the last 5 years as this was coming through online.
Well, I mean, your presentation of this law is a bit a popular explanation, because the key problem was not that concern that you were expressing about European companies facing US companies. The key concern was that our classical competition policy tools were always applied retrospectively. And in fast-changing markets, where with a little change of algorithm you can change everything in a second, the competition authorities were all the time running behind. And we were already at the time of Commissioner Almunia pushing the Commission to do more. At that time, it was a bit the feeling that they thought it's the economy stupid. Then we have been able to switch this with Juncker when there was more awareness of the problem. But still, the key driver was that we wanted competition policy principles that are, by the way, also shared with our United States counterparts. We have more or less the same values on how markets can be organized fairly, that we can apply these principles not only retrospectively, proving that in the past it was this and that, but apply them ahead of time, obliging companies to apply these principles from now to the future and not only watching backwards what they did. And this was the key driver, which was also a key demand of competition policy authorities in the European Union, making things easier. Now, compared to the US, they have a completely different system, because for them, breaking up monopolies and changing companies is much easier. In Europe, we have a very strong value for property rights. So if you are the owner of something, the state cannot take it off from you only under very complicated decisions. In the US, if you put such a case to the judge, it's very easy. The judge is sitting down and checking if he thinks that there is a monopoly, and if he thinks there is, it's finished. He breaks up the company. He doesn't care about your property. You keep the property, but the value is much less then. So that's a bit the difference. But the key drivers of fair competition between us and the Americans are the same. And therefore, I think that J.D. Vance made a great comment, at least on two people in the last government, when he said that Lina Khan and Jonathan Cantor were doing a great job for the American economy. And they did exactly the same what the European Commission did. So I'm a bit surprised that now he has changed opinion, because factually it's exactly the same stuff that we do. We want to make innovation a key driver. We want the best service for the users, and it's the users that have to decide. Nothing else and nothing more. And for sure, on key elements like AI, we want to avoid now that we fall again into the same trap that the gatekeepers put their own AI systems, even if they are much less competitive, much less strong and able to compete in their own systems, and you are obliged to use them. We would like that every citizen can choose his or her own AI tool into the system like Apple or Android to make also the language choice easier, because, for example, Mistral is clearly coming from a French language world, and that also impacts the AI systems. We learned that when we were in Japan, because the Japanese are scared that their language could fall apart in all these language models that are used, at least for a certain time, and they want to be there at the forefront as well. And that's a fair right of every nation. And so we should make sure that we avoid any conglomerate that is getting again in the AI area to that monopoly situation.
How was your interaction with all, you were being approached by the biggest, largest, most powerful tech companies. How was it your interaction? They were lobbying really hard.
Well, first of all, we have every day plenty of exchanges with businesses, trade unions, politicians, and so on. I have to tell you that there was nothing different in that time than before. I think also due to the bigger public spotlight, there was a high level of respect to democratic institutions. And I think that at that moment in time, they knew that it was already lost, that game. There was at a certain time surely a chance for them to fight harder. But you have to understand, Europe or the European Union from the outside looks sometimes a very, very united element. But if you see how legislation is done, it's nearly impossible to trace the responsibility and the input and the real power within that construction. You don't know exactly from whom in the Commission is coming what proposal, but even if you have figured out, then it goes to the Council, you don't know which presidency is dealing with it, then it comes to the Parliament. In the Parliament, you cannot control a Parliament of 720 members. There were recently some very stupid and very shameful incidents, but the European Parliament is the most independent parliament of the world because nearly every MEP can do more or less what he or she believes is the right thing to do. And that makes it very, very difficult for external actors to impact the decision-making process. So it was a very, let's say, reluctant but very easygoing process. The key question, however, was all the time, what have we to do to make the law as performant as needed to fix the problems that are ahead of us? And these problems are still not done because we want the companies to behave and to abide by the law, and they are still not doing it.
Yes, so in a way, I was going to say they lost the lobbying, but they lost the battle, but they appear to be winning the war.
Well, it's not a war; it's an economic competition situation that is in some areas done with unfair tools. And we wanted to take out of the market all the unfair tools and bringing back alignment with the law. And it's now up to the European Commission to come up with a very clear commitment to fine companies that don't abide by the law 100%. Now, abiding by the law 100% in Europe will always be finally decided by the Court of Justice. So even this is still an option. But we haven't even gone there yet, so we expect the Commission to not to lose time and to act now.
But some people would argue that rules are not the way forward. In fact, Apple and Meta, they have delayed features that have become available in the US first because they say that it's uncertain and they don't know how to comply with its rules. So this law is not only not fostering innovation, but it's also delaying innovation from outside.
Well, other people would say that we prefer the Americans to be the guinea pigs to check if the systems work and then bring them to Europe only. I mean, it's true that innovation is getting a challenge, and we have to allow companies also to test critical services, critical products. And we should also accept that this happens in Europe. But at the same time, there are limits because you cannot. The right to fail looks at first sight a very positive message. But if you see that case that we saw in the Netherlands with AI going through all the social security data and then blocking payments to people that were on AI basis considered fraudulous, but in fact weren't doing fraud because the AI system has unfortunately seen or managed some elements wrongly. We have seen a lot, or at least some of people suiciding. And we cannot allow AI tools to be introduced with such a result. Unfortunately, that will never be possible in Europe, and I think rightly so.
And there needs to be some safeguards, but at the same time, something needs to happen, people tell me, to enable Europeans to actually have their own Google, their own Meta, their own Apple. So far, unless I'm missing something, I don't see any evidence that this is the case.
No, I mean, the conditions for companies to grow, especially in digital, are easier in the US than in Europe. There are plenty of reasons. First of all, and this may change now, talent likes to go to these universities in the US. They are not well treated with the new administration, so we hope that they come to Europe. They will be always welcome. Secondly, investment capital has traditionally been better off in the US. And I fear that this may stay even like that with that new administration, because the Americans have another approach to failure, to business failure, than the Europeans. Also, the capital markets are having an easier way of integrating failure. In Europe, this is more complicated. And to a certain extent, because all of these AI models, they first of all need supercomputers, they need a cloud, and this is all about money and investment. It's not only about a good idea. Very often, it's just about implementing a good idea in plenty of tools and machines. And there, in that upscaling, the Americans are better also because their market, even though they have 51 states, is still easier than in the European Union with 27.
But you're describing a new scenario where there might be incentives for businesses to come here. Are you detecting that that's a real thing, or is it more just initial conversation?
No, I think that there are examples. I mean, I see a lot of new drive from companies in that digital area in Paris, for example, in France. But we have also recently seen it in Spain, in my region even, in the southwestern part of Germany, around SAP, Saarbrücken, but also Heilbronn. There are amazing, surprising, apart from Berlin, for example, amazing, surprising developments. But they all face the situation that investment is much shorter in Europe, and that talent tends to prefer to go to the US because of further business opportunities there. And that can change now. And so we should also endeavor to use that situation.
You talked about AI quite a bit, and the technology is fast evolving. Some critics say that these new tech rules are becoming almost obsolete. Not obsolete, perhaps is a strong word, but that they need revisiting to allow for this AI and the change of some of the practices that big tech are having to capture this. Do you think that we should be reopening the DMA or making changes?
Well, there are two issues here. The first strand is that the DMA is open for new core platform services that the Commission can come up with by way of delegated legislation. So AI is already covered. I also recently wrote an article on it. AI as a core platform service could be easily covered if the thresholds are met. Secondly, cloud service is already mentioned in the DMA, so we have no white area there for competition policy application. But we have the AI Act on the other side, which has been starting in Europe maybe a bit with too much moral reflections and too little view on business development. But what companies complain at the moment about is that's so difficult also because of missing implementing acts, that they don't know what high-risk appliances are. But it's very difficult to know this because if you don't know really what high risk could mean, how can you know that your AI tool is matching with it? So there is a risk assessment, first of all, to be done with those that have the AI idea. And then they should not only check the boxes that the possible delegated act, which is still missing, should bring them, but they have also to make an own assessment. And there are even AI tools to check AI. So it's a bit of a new technology entering the real life, and everyone is a bit scared, reflecting, breaking, because it's unclear where it leads. But that has nothing to do with the legislation, or not that much to do with the legislation. It has to do that we have to embrace this new technology and that we have to get some experiences, and we don't have them yet in the let's say, daily life. We have it on some applications like ChatGPT, which is rather some sort of search engine with a bit more data, but we don't have it in a lot of machine-related concrete daily life impacting decision-making AI tools, and that will come, but we have to slowly get used to it, and we should not believe that this can be done in one shot.
Mm-hmm. As we wrap up, and you're talking about technology, but also talking about regulation, Brussels has been known to have this so-called Brussels effect of the world copying our rules. This new commission is talking about the opposite. It's about reducing red tape, not coming out with one act after another, one bill after the next. How do you see the role of the European Commission in the next sort of 5 years in terms of being a leader? Should it continue to be just the leader in drafting rules? Or should there be a shift of a mindset, or something needs to happen, something needs to break?
No, I would say the European Union can be still attracting a lot of other legislations, a lot of other areas of the world to follow our rules if we make the best rules. And there is no doubt that some of the rules that have been made in the last term, I don't want to mention Mr. Timmermans here, but that we went beyond what has been expected. If you take, for example, corporate social responsibility, there is no doubt that there are some international financial regulation rules even that demand sustainability also for investors. But in that new booklet that has been done by the EFRAG, there is also the rule that you have to outline as a precondition for your balance sheet as a company how many lifelong learning measures you have done, and you have to divide the graph by gender. So you don't even know how many male, female, and others, and how many others. You don't even know. It's getting a bit too far, honestly. I mean, sustainability is not so complicated. It means that you have to look not only for tomorrow and for your product of today, but also the day after tomorrow. And companies can enjoy a bit of freedom. If you are building bottles for champagne, you may also have a view on how champagne will be drunk in 20 years, how much alcohol people, but it's up to you to decide about that. We don't need to make rules for every element, especially not as a precondition for the balance sheet. And that's only an example where we went too far. And we went too far not only with the legislation, but also with the secondary delegated legislation, where EFRAG in that case went too far. And we have to stop this. We have to be creating a frame which is really outlining the main points and leaving a bit of liberty to those that can deal with that themselves.
Andreas Schwab, it's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.